It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. I cannot be happier to have this episode happening today. I got two great, amazing investigators, in my opinion, on the show at once on the same topic. So I really think this is going to be an outstanding episode. And I also got the usual suspect when it comes to this stuff and true crime and, you know, just an occult reject in general. I got Lisa with me. Thank you very much, Lisa, for jumping on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. And I got her back again. This is probably like the third time in the last month and a half. I love her work and I love the topic she is covering. I got Dana. What is up, Dana? And you want to let everybody know who you are and what your deal is.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be back. You can find me on YouTube at Routing Jules, same for Instagram, and then Dana Duda on Twitter.
Awesome, thank you very much. And I have your all your info. I think I have your link tree in the bottom, so everything should be there.
Perfect.
And then, of course, we got JJ Vance back on. I mean, he's another one that I've had him on my show multiple times recently. Can't get enough of you, bro. I love your research. So as soon as I mentioned something about the Process Church and you started, you know, rambling off all this stuff and with the music aspect, which I find very interesting, nice. I was like, oh, I got to get him on because, you know, Dana's done a lot more work on the Process Church, I think, since the last time I've had her on. And when I had Michelle's Healing Home on for the Process Church, at the end, we kind of slightly got into the music aspect. And it really started making me think there was a lot more to the music aspect. And then I even looked a little bit into Skinny Puppy because they have an album called The Process. And I was like, oh, look at there. It's even based on the Process Church. And somehow me and JJ Vance started talking about it, and he started hitting me with all this stuff. And I was like, I got to get you on because you're continuing where we kind of left off with Michelle. And I know Dana's got plenty of stuff that we could talk about too. So I thought this would be like a great mishmash of two investigators on this topic.
Yeah, for sure.
So, not to, again, I wasn't sure, where we want to go with this. Maybe Dana, do you want to start off maybe like what's some of the stuff, maybe talk about some of the stuff you've kind of been, looking at and showing since the last time you were on?
Sure.
I know you've been going into best friends a little bit more and stuff with that. I know you've gone into that as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I tried to listen to the last time that I was on, just like on speed play. That way I wasn't repeating myself. So now I have factually traced all the founding members, specifically, besides Robert de Grimston, to Best Friends Animal Society. Everybody went to Kanab. I have found all of them. We have also learned since then that specifically there is a very strong suspicion that Robert de Grimston was directly involved with Sharon Tate in Rome prior to them coming back to the States and what happened at Cielo Drive. Let me see what else. Oh, today I found a fascinating newspaper article that Robert de Grimston admits in an interview that Charles Manson was a member of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. This is the only time that I've actually seen this in publication. And something that I think is important to point out, because I'm not really like familiar with the music. I know that they are, you know, even in today's scene, like Skinny Puppy, stuff like that. And I think with Cielo Drive, with like Trent Reznor buying that door, you know what I mean, and renting out the house, I think that there's a really important element that I just haven't looked into. So I'm really interested to hear your work on this. But specifically, the notion of the schism of the process where Robert and Mary Ann sort of part ways, I am of the opinion now, because I have traced them through their Jesus people, Jesus freak movement. And then as they get into the mediumship and psychics and dolphins and all of that stuff, I think that all of that is for public consumption, because as you follow them all over the country, they're pretty much calling for the exact same thing. They're just not talking about Satan or Lucifer. They're talking about Jehovah, even though technically, if you're being theologically honest, Jehovah is the end. You know what I mean? That's still the destruction of humanity, the end of humanity. It's just so many lies, and that is how they were able to basically get a stranglehold in Kanab in Kane County. I have been given police reports that they were using enough electricity to power a small city. They compared it also to a like engineering company that was in Kane County that had a sawmill. They were using more electricity than that company, just best friends themselves. And they were threatening to shoot people down with cruise missiles for flying over their property. And there were people that were taking tours of Kanab, of Angel Canyon Ranch, and they didn't see any animals. They didn't see anybody, and they felt the need to put in the police report that they did not hear or see anybody being held against their will. I think that that's super bizarre. But as far as them using that much electricity and talking about cruise missiles, that makes me think that they're running something underground. You know what I mean?
I don't think they had a
they were
hydroponic plant system going on yet then.
Yeah, they're just puffing that kush out in the desert. That's all they're doing. they're not sacrificing anything. No one's missing. Don't worry about it. We're just getting high and just vibing out, man. And in Arizona, for I think it was about 10 years, and it's real nuts that nobody ever asked them about this, but they were involved in animal husbandry as well. So they were doing some type of weird breeding. But like I said, as you sort of move through everything, I am 100% convinced that they are involved in what happened at Cielo Drive and La Bianca. And now that I have finished reading The Ultimate Evil, I am also convinced that they were deeply involved in what happened with the Son of Sam specifically.
I think that was even something J.J. Vance was telling me about as well.
Yeah.
There was two things that you just mentioned here. One pertains, I wanted to ask Lisa. I think it was a conversation we were having yesterday. Didn't you even say something you were just questioning or wondering if maybe the best friends were kind of jumping on the whole thing of actually taking organs from animals and selling them?
Yeah. So, Dana, I've been listening to your lives. And so some of the key words that you have said in digging all that, I started to do a little digging myself. And so, one of the upcoming, I guess, thing to invest in or the new big thing in biotech is animal health. And what they're doing is that it's a multitude of things. And now I'm not accusing anyone of doing any of this. But I found a lot of links of a lot of biotech companies, startup companies that are basically investing in pet donation or pet organ tissue donation. And so what in my experience, if you have a shelter, and you're spay and neutering cats and dogs, how easily it is to go in and remove a kidney, they have two, or half of a spleen, and donate it to what is now an up-and-coming market. Because you can, I guess, like the surgery for a kidney, and the kidneys and spleens are the most popular with pet tissue organ donation. And so it could run you anywhere between 15,000 to 20,000 an organ. And obviously the cost and all that other stuff. Okay, so, and then now with pet insurance, you can afford that, right? You can pay that off, you can bill the insurance, however you want to do that. But if you have a shelter and you're doing spays and neuters, how easy is it to remove a kidney? And no one's going to check, does my cat come with 2 kidneys? You know, you just adopt the cat and be like, thank you very much, right? That's one avenue. The second avenue is blood donation. There's a lot of need for blood donation from dogs because of, I think, even with some of these hurricanes and some of these disasters, they call for blood donations, especially from dogs. That's the second one.
Well, I mean, that's what the Son of Sam was doing, according to him. He was killing people for a fucking dog. He was blood sacrifice.
So, right. So the other thing that is up and coming with the biotech is the lab-grown meat. They still need animal tissue, and they can modify it, especially with CRISPR, but they absolutely need animal tissue in order to start the base pair or the basis of the tissue growing. I linked a bunch of companies that are in the pet organ tissue donation that have merged with some of these lab meat grown companies, especially the one, I think it's called Roslyn Tech out of London. And they were the ones that cloned Dolly first, Dolly the sheep.
Oh.
So that's a huge one. The other thing is organ for people, in that if you have animal husbandry, you can grow a select amount of animals under conditions that have no diseases and modify anything that you want, however you want, take the organ, run it through CRISPR, change. I think they did it already with a pig. They delete 4 genes, add 6 human genes, insert it into a human, you get no rejection.
Wow.
So
well. Look at you little genius.
That would be very profitable too. That would be very profitable.
Yeah.
And that was where, because you were talking about shell companies. And so I was like, if I don't know how to properly look for shell companies, I don't, I'll admit it. But in looking at some of the corporate records, you see all these startup companies popping up in the last 5 to 10 years. I don't know if they're related, but there's a ton of them. And I was like, if I could just go through each one of them and see who the investors are. So I'm going to create that for you. I'll put that up on Twitter for you and tag you in all of it. And so that way, at least you have that avenue. And I think that would be a profitable avenue for them in the event that they need money.
Oh, for sure.
Hell yeah.
That's extremely profitable.
That's brilliant.
And the other thing, carcasses. Vet schools need carcasses in order to teach students. Mm-hmm. So do they incinerate the carcasses or do they donate them? Right?
No one knows because nobody's allowed on the property.
Right. And then the other thing is donor invested funds. That's a way to hide money. That's another one. So that it's a merge between a private organization, non-profit organization, and a public one, in that you can get your paperwork up front, get all the benefits of a tax break, but never have to donate anything, so to speak.
Interesting.
But that's yeah.
So
anyway.
On that note, because that made me think of it, you're brilliant, and thank you, because
Absolutely.
Now I forgot to mention it. I also tied Best Friends Animal Society to the Leave It family.
Yes, that's right.
The Ukraine-loving Leave It, as you call them. So I'm also now thinking about them, trying to trade kids for buffalo, specifically in Ukraine. The shell stuff, I'll have to dig into that, because there's some interesting funny money moving around in the early stages of Best Friends in the early 90s, specifically with that guy Reed Slatkin, who's in prison for a Ponzi scheme right now. And then I'm going through all of the land records in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah, and finding all of the investors, because I found the dude that bought the property originally to hunt for Montezuma's gold. And of course, he's like, some upper crust snob. But yeah, we have a long way to go.
Gotcha.
Interesting.
And then there was a thing that you had mentioned, Dana, I think, about Manson. That was something, I could be wrong, when I say this, JJ, but were you saying something to me yesterday about that Manson stuff being like a studio at some point, or a Hollywood studio?
Yeah, well, the two good points I think on there, and Dana brought it up, one of them already, with Trent Reznor and the Polanski Tate house. He did move in there and build a studio called La Pig Studios, which I do find intriguing because that ties right into the Manson murders there, right, with the writings on the wall. And further, regarding Skinny Puppy and this whole neo-process movement in this industrial rock scene, Genesis P-Origin and gang were involved with that whole La Pig Studios and Trent Reznor as well, and actually recording that Broken, part of that Broken album, that EP that William Ramsey highlights in his Smiley Face Killers documentary as being somewhat process related and potentially somewhat related to the Smiley Face Killer situation. That whole Broken EP was partly recorded therein, I think partly in Wisconsin, in Lake Geneva, just north of Chicago, and the other part in La Pig Studios.
Yeah, okay.
But to answer your question regarding the movie studios, yeah. So the Manson family legend, they go and history, they go and live on the old Spawn movie ranch at one point in time. They're just in the north part of the Hollywood Hills. And strangely enough, the Process Church ends up, when they become the Best Friends Animal Society, moving into a old Hollywood studio ranch in southern Utah. So I find that very intriguing. Yeah.
I'm glad you noticed that too.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of films that were filmed there. I mean, some big ones. One of the last ones that was filmed there was The Outlaw Josie Wales with Clint Eastwood, and that was 1976. And the director of that film was actually a direct friend of Charles Manson. He's the one who integrated Charles Manson into Hollywood, a man that Manson spent some time with in Terminal Island, Philip Kaufman.
Interesting.
So there are some direct connections there between the not only just the mode of operations with moving into these old movie studio ranches, but also the parties involved or directly involved with both organizations.
That's very interesting. That's great. I'm glad you noticed that too. I thought it was really weird. I'm like,
super weird.
They're doing the same thing. They're moving into a movie studio in the desert, except for Best Friends still has part of that property is still leased by Disney today. Like the current land records. Yeah, one of the lots is still leased and owned by Disney. And I'm like, why is Disney involved with the process? Because I don't call them, allegedly, supposedly, whatever. I don't call them the Best Friends. They're the process. These are the exact same people doing the exact same thing. People need to start calling them out on their nonsense.
No, I'm the same way. I refer them as the process as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Hell yeah.
Two things.
It's the same people. They're not doing different things. I mean, there's articles from 2004 from the Salt Lake City Tribune claiming the Best Friends Animal Society is not related to the process, even though they're quoting the director of the Best Friends Animal Society that's a founding member of the process. So it's the same guy. Mm-hmm. They're trying to disconnect the two circumstances there from.
Well, the other thing that's really weird. So I've been digging through all of the newspaper archives and I'm still finding new people. But as far as, the inner processians, that core group. So one of the women, I just found her obituary, and Julie Castle, the CEO of Best Friends today, she was talking about how at those, I think their annual lint roller parties, that woman was using her psychic powers, at those parties. So this was just written last year, in October of last year, where they're talking about this. I'm like, these people literally have not changed at all whatsoever.
Yeah, for sure.
That's why I think the whole schism of Robert and Mary is, I just don't buy it. You know what I mean? I think that was what allowed that side of the coast to do what they needed to do as far as what they were doing. And then this side, as far as the Jesus freak sort of movement.
Yeah. That comports with kind of what I've kind of researched and analyzed with the circumstances as well. In regard, if I can add a point on the Levitt family, they're I know figure Nick would enjoy some Mormon history. So the Levitts are descendants, I believe, from Parley P. Pratt, if I'm not mistaken, one of the OG.
I hate to interrupt you, but I have noticed Pratt being a huge name throughout Mormonism, and it's made me wonder about the actor now.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, especially within the hierarchy of the Mormon Church, I can attest to this from my experiences as a member for about 18 years in the Mormon Church. And that is the upper echelon. There are, tiers of membership. You have the descendants of some of the founding families of the Mormon Church, who I actually grew up with some of those founding families in my ward of the Mormon Church. So I saw some of those activities and how those people are interacting with the church as well. And these founding members very much still run that church today. I mean, Mitt Romney, I believe, is also a Parley P. Pratt descendant, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, wow. I could be mixing up my original OG Mormon guys. It's either Parley P. Pratt or no, I think it is Pratt. Anyway, there is definitely a hierarchy, and these individuals who are descendants from the original founding members are certainly still very powerful within the church today. And Levitts fall within that category, and they are up to some creepy activity, including suspected child trafficking of Native American kids and shipping them off, trading them to Ukraine, like you mentioned. And, I think the heat has kind of turned up on some of the Levitts, because one of them, I think it was David Levitt, moved to Scotland recently. He bought a castle.
Wow. Yeah, he did. He's a sneaky Pete. It's interesting that he moved there because the gentleman that he just had is having extradited back to Utah for that satanic ritual abuse case was being held by Interpol in Scotland. And David Levitt literally had the audacity to make a live stream on his YouTube channel where they're renovating their castle. And he's like, this might seem kind of weird that I just bought a castle where so-and-so is being held by Interpol, who has accused me of X, Y, and Z, but that's not why we're here. And I'm like, okay, bro.
Oh, wow.
Weird
take. That's bizarre.
That's creepy.
Yeah, and just that circumstance in general, the guy, I mean, any of y'all are probably familiar, but folks in the interwebs may not, the guy holds a press conference claiming he's not a cannibalistic child rapist, and no one was publicly accusing him of it at that point. So it's kind of to have that press conference.
Yeah, I remember that was something I covered. I thought was wild. It's like, the dude almost told on himself.
Exactly. No, that's exactly what he did.
Guilty conscience.
Because then the police guy come out and say, we weren't, but now we're going to.
Yeah, no, Utah County Sheriff was like, well, now that you mentioned it, we'll investigate you too now, bud. I'm sure he already was investigating him.
They were investigating him. They were, because this case, this has been my suspicion for a long time, because I had started researching a different angle of that a year and a half ago. The guy, Nicolas Alaverdian / Rossy / Arthur Knight, who is being brought back by Interpol specifically for this. So when you look into that guy, because David Levitt paints him as, just this massive sexual criminal and, a man of many identities, and he's changed his identity so many times, and he's fled the States, and he's running around the world, and he's terrorizing women. Well, that guy, I did a really deep dive on him, and it turns out that he actually was involved in what I would say, I don't know if you're familiar with the Franklin scandal specifically. Sure. More of a modern day Franklin scandal that still implicates Father Flanagan's Boys Town in Nebraska. Oh, wow. But this dude got a case brought in front of a judge, and there were 16 state representatives that testified on his behalf, saying that they were aware of a DCYF night-to-night program where kids were being trafficked, and that he was not lying, and he got laws passed. But he called out David Levitt online. He wrote a blog and was implicating him in some really dark things, because he was being trafficked all over the coast, from Rhode Island all the way to Utah specifically. And that was when David Levitt, decided to come out and do that press conference. But that case specifically, the origins in Utah dates back to the 80s. That memo from Bishop Glenn Pace, where he was talking about that cult in the Wasatch Front, I think, that had infiltrated part of the LDS church specifically. That all ties in, and that is the same time that Best Friends came to Utah. So that's been my secret suspicion all along, and I've been digging through the land records out there. I've already tied Best Friends to Zion's Bank, which is owned by the Mormon Church, so I've at least got one financial tie to one of the first properties that they bought. But that's the link. I think that all roads lead to Utah eventually.
I think that's a good point, yeah.
when I was covering Dave Levitt to begin with, like when I went back into some of like those accusations and with the sex trafficking, somehow I got to like this lady Barbara Snow, and then I got to like this cult of Zion or something too. I can't remember how I got onto that, but like there was even like some kind of like Mormon cult of Zion that like somehow through the spider web covering David Levitt, I got to that. So,
yeah,
I mean,
if I'm not
really
mistaken,
weird.
Nick, I believe it's she was part of she was a client of Levitt's wife, who was some sort of strange therapist lady who was involved in these very bizarre kind of therapy.
Almost kind of, they
things.
were wondering if she was like implanting into people's heads that they were molested as kids, even if they weren't.
Exactly.
Something weird like that, yeah.
Or they
Shalom.
were implanting false memories of it.
Shalom, leave it such a hoe. I can't stand her. Did you know she works at Essalon?
Oh, really?
Yeah, dude, she works at Essalon. She's a professor
I
at
did not know that.
Essalon Institute. She is so sus.
That is extremely suspect, yeah. No, and I think a lot of these groups, they love this whole concept of these false memories, and that's something that circles around these Levitt people as well.
You know,
and other is what I like to describe as process church cover-uppers.
Well, some of the academics are like so into the whole mental psychology, parapsychology. I mean, it's heavy in there. Like I think you had mentioned Bainbridge. He has somewhat of a pedigree to, and I had mentioned it last time, a pedigree to Henry Murray, who was the professor there at Harvard who did the experiments on Ted Kaczynski. And I believe he was part of the OSS. He left for some time, came back, and when he came back, he became a professor emeritus, I believe around the time that Bainbridge had just started at Harvard in the same department. So, and then, you know, he had gone off to Cambridge, I believe, and did a stint. And most of the literature that Bainbridge publishes is through the University of Cambridge. So
that's fascinating. I'm going to look into that because
for sure.
That would be an additional OSS tie because the lawyer that incorporated them in Louisiana, Tommy Bomer, from what I have found thus far, his dad was a member of the OSS as well. And he was working under the guise of like a chef on the cruise liners working, you know, but ended up always, it looks like he was doing some sort of like trafficking or something specifically in Louisiana because he was constantly going back and forth from like Guatemala, Cuba, back to Louisiana. But I found 2 other books about Bainbridge, and I would love to get your take on this specifically because you're so smart about the biotech stuff. So he has written The Revival of the Process. He talks about, it's Robert or Marianne, I think it's Marianne, sending him cylinders of DNA to be preserved and reintegrated into technology. Then there's another book that I found, and it's called A Postmortem Society. And it talks about, there's a huge portion of that book that just talks about Mary Ann being reintegrated into a cybernetic future specifically, and like the dynamic, and they frame it as like Camelot, but it's all about Mary Ann de Grimston. It's a hellscape. So I'm going to send you that book and see what your take is.
For sure.
I think that she did.
Now that you're talking about, so you've mentioned a lot about Mary de Grimston and how that, you know, she's kind of propped up in this way as maybe this, you know, figurehead of manipulating and what have you. And again, going off of your live streams with keywords, I started looking into Henry Murray again because of Bainbridge. And Murray has also a pedigree to Alfred North Whitehead. And he was the one that started writing a bunch of books with process philosophy. And and Bertrand Russell wrote a book with him. And so when you start reading process philosophy, it's almost like you're reading the actual script for the process. And how it's like pro-cessation, like pro-cessation. You know, they're looking forward or towards the end. And then going off of that, I believe there was a woman who kind of models the same thing as Marianne, and she was propped up by Carl Jung. And she basically starts or pushes the affair with Henry Murray to kind of get him going. And then obviously the ties to potentially MK Ultra. But this woman, her name was Christiana Morgan, was also dating, hold on, I have it all written down. She was dating the guy who would end up becoming Charles Wiseman, Charles Wiseman, who would end up becoming the basically president of the Zionist organization, later the first president of Israel, and sat together with Rothschild to create the Balfour Declaration.
Wow.
Holy shit, that's the tie to Balfour. Sorry, excuse my language.
No,
I knew that there was going to be a tie to Balfour, man, because
that's interesting.
Yeah.
That, I was wondering why they called it that. Like, you know, why
well, he was the
it
prime minister, and he was the one that wrote it, but it was basically, it was Charles Wiseman and Rothschild who sat down on 19th of June, 1917, and they drafted the declaration, and then pretty much had the prime minister write it up and push it, and then that's when British government said, hey, this is going to happen, and we're pushing it, and this is how it's going to be.
So where does Winston Churchill fall into that equation then? This is very interesting. It's the first I've heard of this.
Yeah, no, he comes out, I believe he comes after, and it was, let's see, what was the first name?
That's interesting because Winston Churchill did meet with Aleister Crowley, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
And Crowley's all in there as well. I mean, they were all having tea and crumpets, I guess. I mean,
tea and crumpets, nice.
So, I mean, so this guy, Charles Wiseman, he was the person who was fundamental in obtaining that Balfour. And it was while he was dating Christiana. And Christiana was attending this women's college that ended up spending some time with Carl Jung. And then somehow they hook up, and then that's done. And then she moves on to Henry Murray and pushes that whole thing. They're together. She also drowns in 2 feet of water later, but
interesting, even more interesting.
So yeah. No, it's pretty deep. But
no, that's some good research there, Lisa. I appreciate that. That's
and it's all inspired because of Dana, because of keywords you say, and tacking away on the keyboard. So that's all.
And the reason I asked Winston Churchill, Nick might appreciate this based on some recent conversations that he and I have had in recent podcasts and. Some work that I focus on my podcast on Operation GCD, and that's the Society of Cincinnati. Winston Churchill was a member of the Society of Cincinnati, which is the secret society that formed America, created America. Now, the OG Mormon families, be it Joseph Smith, Parley P. Pratt, etc., these are all descendants of members of the Society of Cincinnati as well. They would have been members as well, hereditary members. It's a modern day knighthood where it gets passed down to the paternal lines. Now, I find all that interesting because there seems to be a lot of my thesis is that any conspiracy theory in America leads back to the Society of Cincinnati, essentially, and that there's been a feuding sides of the secret society that created America since at least 1803 when I believe it was 1803 when Aaron Burr murdered Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was the President General of the Society of Cincinnati. And Aaron Burr was a member of the society. So that was the coup to take over America, was to first kill the President General of the society before Aaron Burr tried the rest of his coup. Now, I find all of this very interesting because the Process Church literal attorney, a man by the name of John Markham, this would have been the man in 1974. Dana seems to shaking in her head and agrees that she knows who John Markham is. Yeah, he incorporated the Process Church in New York as a young attorney. And 4 months later, then incorporated the Foundation Faith of the Millennium, I believe. Dana can correct me if I'm wrong on which Foundation
Faith of God.
Foundation, there we go. I knew they had a couple different Foundation Faiths. Couldn't remember which one came first. Thank you. But so Markham then incorporates that. And then 2 years later in 1976, he moves to San Francisco and becomes the attorney for the Foundation Faith of the Millennium out of San Francisco from 1977 to 1980. And then in 1980, he goes to work for William Weld as the deputy U.S. attorney for the state of Massachusetts. William Weld was the U.S. attorney for the state of Massachusetts at the time. The Weld family is a very prominent Society of Cincinnati family. Now, they actually, for example, the Society of Cincinnati headquarters in Washington, D.C. is named the Lars Anderson House. Lars Anderson was the president general of the society back in the 1930s, I believe it was, 20s and 30s. And his wife was Isabella Weld, and she's from the same Weld family. And this is a very prominent family again throughout the whole Society of Cincinnati. And I often wonder what the kind of the interaction or the epicenter of activity between these kind of Society of Cincinnati families and this occult undertone, under the society of not to conflate too many societies, but this whole occult environment that exists in American society to this day. And I often wonder what the epicenter of these activities are between these quote unquote elite families and this occult activity. And I think the Weld family is a good study on that because, for example, another member of the Weld family is the Hollywood actress Tuesday Weld. And Tuesday Weld, if any of y'all are familiar, or folks of the interwebs, Anton LaVey dedicated his Satanic Bible to Tuesday Weld. And in 1972, he said the reason why he did that was because she was part of the rituals, whatever that means.
Interesting.
Wow. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting that you point out, and it's something that can't be overstated, is the societies, the noble families, because I don't think that I got to it the last time that we talked about the process, but I did figure out where Day Grimston came from. So I had confirmed that Robert specifically, it had nothing to do with Mary Ann. He was using the name 4 years before they got married. But where it came from was his sister, Barbara Moore. So she was the goddaughter of Lady Armitrude Wormoth de Grimston. So this is like black nobility type stuff. He was selected, and he was the only one in the house. Barbara wasn't even using it. It was just him. And then his father, Oswald Moore, and his grandfather, the Reverend, or I call him the Rev Moore, who was under the Vatican as a clerk of the Holy Orders. They were involved in opium trafficking in Shanghai, both his dad and his grandfather. So there's that sort of like drug angle, you know what I mean? But also then a nobility lineage. So I think that that's interesting. And as far as the Foundation Faith of God in New York, the two agents, because it's still listed as the Foundation Faith of God to this day. It's not under the cloak of Best Friends in New York. That's where it sits, and it shows it was formerly the process. The two lawyers that are the agents now, one of the families, I did a deep dive and found that they were Nazi German assets that were brought over here and protected by the United States. And the other family, I have tied them to the Siena line of Italian nobility and directly to Operation Gladio. So
Italian or Sicilian?
It said it was Italian. Like I don't know anything about Italian nobility, but it said Italian, and then Siena was the name of the family.
Interesting. No, I only asked because these the same families that comprised, if you follow back these Society of Cincinnati families back to the Knights Templar, they go back to the Norman families, and the Normans also not only invaded the United Kingdom, they invaded Sicily at the same time. So all these Sicilian families have a very similar heritage if you go back 1,000 years.
Interesting.
Yeah. And in regard to Levitt in Scotland, that's interesting you bring up with these nobility families out of there, because I actually suspect there is some sort of connection there as well, because I don't know Levitt's exact Scottish history, but given his Mormon history, Society of Cincinnati kind of backgrounds, these families all came from Knights Templar families, which would have originated in around the United Kingdom, but focused out of Scotland. And on top of that, another good example of these kind of occultists that are of those same ancestry, Colonel Michael Aquino claims to be the Duke of Argyll, the descendant of the Duke of Argyll. And the Duke, I can attest to my research, the Dukes of Argyll are part of that same Scottish Knights Templar heritage.
Interesting.
I had a question from Michelle Healing Homes. Do you all have an opinion on Nicolas Schreck, husband of Zena Schreck, on Anton LaVey's daughter? I don't know if any of you ever came much across them at all.
I think he's a tool. Sorry, Nick. I think he's a tool.
We actually spoke about him last week, Nick. We were looking for a documentary that he did back in the '80s. You were going to take a look, and I haven't found it yet either. But
oh yeah, that's right. I told you I was going to try to find it on Pirate Bay and some shit like that on my my cracked Fire Stick. Yeah, I still got to look into that. That's funny how you were. And what were you saying about that? How he was like, what did he make movies or something? What was it? Yeah,
it was a documentary. It was some sort of like pro satanic movement documentary situation that he did in the mid '80s that seems to be very process related.
I agree. I would agree. The Internet Archive is forever, Nick. We know that you were a fan of the Nazis and are probably still a Nazi, in my opinion, because the process is they are Nazis as well. So
yeah, for sure. And that's interesting. You brought up the Project Paperclip kind of situation with some of these families that are related to this whole situation, because there is this extreme Nazi bend to this entire satanic process church, movement.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially with the imagery and in the court records, because there was all this lore about did Marianne think that she was Goebbels like in a past life, whatever, but in those court records and the Ed Sanders lawsuit, they talk about one of the journalists was, at a couple of the process scenes in the UK, but they were talking about how, the Holocaust that happened because of those people's guilt and they deserved it. I mean, that was their theology specifically. So.
Yeah, very extremism, that's for sure.
You know what I've also I'm just assuming because of all the connections that you can see with somehow we're going back to Utah, that's Mormonism, which I do. Obviously, I mean, Joseph Smith, they don't even deny it. He was a Mason, Obviously, there was some sort of occultism behind that religion, I think. And connections to this weird cult or connections to the Church of Satan or whatever. To me, I would just think that there has to be some sort of occultism behind, this stuff. It's and it's the weird thing. It's is there some underlying group that is somehow mixed up into all this that we don't even know about? Right. You know what I'm saying? It's just very weird how you get all these different little. It's like this, spider web of different kind of occult philosophies that all somehow make its way to the process church through degrees of separation. It's what's the whole weird? There's got to be some weird thing underlying with that, I think.
Well, weren't they trying to invoke entities in the Caribbean, which led them to Stool? And then in Stool, they were, trying to communicate with something of sorts, and that gave them the doctrine by which they now follow. And then, I say everyone, but everyone knows that a lot of the Mesoamerican religions believe how most of the animals are a way to connect with, or that they can, or at least the dog, the short one with the little mohawk, I forget the name, it's with an X, and that they are the go-between between this realm and the other realm. They have something, I believe that they believe that the German Shepherds are going to be able to sense the end coming. And then animals themselves are, I guess, psychic, but sensitive more.
They use German Shepherds a lot for cadavers, don't they?
They do.
And see, that's what even found Shannon Gilbert with the whole Gilgo Beach. The German Shepherd.
They do. I
which I think is an occult bullshit story in a sense.
Yeah. Definitely police uses shepherds. They've notoriously used shepherds. I believe now, and correct me if I'm wrong, JJ, they use Malinois with Border Patrol now.
Yeah, Belgian Malinois, yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are some good points. I think dogs do have a sense of detection for a lot of things that we don't, as humans, don't understand, be it earthquakes, be it diabetes. Dogs have been trained to detect both of those, a whole wide spectrum of activities.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of my whole take in terms of, and I don't know if that is occultism. I'm not, I don't know the clear-cut definition of it. But to me, it seems like when you're involving animals and you're invoking and you're getting doctrine from whatever, it seems like it's not your stereotypical, I don't know, seance.
Would you say that these dogs are also prone to being trained?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly why they use them.
Something that I've been thinking about, and it just, because I think a lot of occult groups are also into this, eugenics. We're already seeing stuff with the dogs, with the dog stuff, dog donations, organs. The Mormons, I think, are into, eugenics. So it's like, look, the one thing that I thought was, not to discredit what Epstein did with, these women, but it's like, it was known that he was like an eugenicist. We just like lightly just mentioned that, and nothing really came from that. And like, what the hell is going on with that Egyptian temple on your property? Yeah. Like these two wild other things that go along with this guy we just looked over. And it's just, I think that whole thing, there was some occult shit behind that. And it's like, again, eugenics. It's like, and like it just ties to Utah. It just gets really weird. And I don't know. I think like there might be some eugenics behind all this as well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it's a little bit of a tangent, but, going back off of biblical history, remember the whole casting of demons and putting them in pigs? Is there a way to trap entities into animals?
I did.
And then connect with the animal themselves and talk to them? And I know that's a totally different avenue you want to go into, but in that their obsession with these animals, especially dogs, I think is a key to something for sure. But I don't know why. And then the whole having sex with them, I think I got that from your live stream, Dana, that the contracting of venereal diseases from some of these dogs and stuff like that. And you have
talking about the Manson girls.
Mm-hmm, and then now you have a whole bunch of.
I saw that same live stream. That was some good.
That was a great one.
There,
That they have a lot of medical personnel now on these facilities because of the animal shelter thing. Is it a way to kind of keep them, on retainer? Some of these medical type personnel. I don't know. It's a hunch, but
no, it seems some good thoughts for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're on track as far as the.
Like even the Nazi ties makes me think,
Right.
Well,
right.
Yeah, the Nazi stuff, 100%. They can try to deny that, but it's irrelevant because we see it for what it is.
Correct.
But in Stuhl specifically, because they went to the Bahamas, they went to, I think it was Mexico City, and then Cecil, and then they went to Stuhl, and that was obviously where they ended up. So that's where they say that they found Satan or Satan found them. Now, Timothy Wiley, I think it was Timothy Wiley or Peter McCormick, which was Father Malachi, he in one interview made a really weird comment about they almost got arrested for trafficking the Alsatians, like in international waters. They didn't have a permit for it, like some sort of like really weird comment that like, oh, that's the only time that we've ever only been arrested, blah, 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 blah. But the Church of Scientology specifically has internal records that, according to them, the process was doing paramilitary and guerrilla warfare training in Stuhl. So I think that it's a combination of both. But with the dogs, I think that would be a perfect place for them to be isolated, to perfect their sort of like behavior modification, group control, and as far as maybe channeling things into the dogs, because they had a bunch of dogs there. So, and if the church knew what they were doing, the church was very likely funding them. So I'm sure that they had a lovely black budget to get whatever they needed.
And paramilitary with German Shepherds. I mean, come on.
Yeah, and that seems to surround the process wherever they go. There were activities like that in Atlanta and around the child killings that may or may not have involved Wayne Williams being involved in that group. And I think that's a good point, though. And regarding Stuhl and Scientology, David Miscavige kind of even, he almost kind of roasts this idea that there was any Scientologists being involved in any kind of sort of paramilitary training, right? He gave
He's the one that outed it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
He's the one that outed the whole thing.
And I just saw a comment about regarding this whole idea of importing souls into other vessels, be it human or dog, about the LDS and their baptisms for the dead. That's an excellent point that someone just made in the chat. That is sort of the concept.
Yeah, I figured I'd put that up, and if you would know if it was right.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good one. I caught my eye. I was like, "Yo, that is a great."
Yeah,
point.
When I saw that, I mean, I just use Slick is normally on point, so I was like, oh damn, that's a really good point, you know.
No, that's that is the concept behind that, right? For sure. And
Go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just want to insert this because I will forget. There's a band called Stool that when you look up their album covers, it's process iconography all over.
Holy smokes.
And so it's like, how more obvious can you be? And so, yeah, I'll have to send you the link. But yeah, there's...
Please do. Yes. Yeah, I'd love to see that because it is rampant within this music industry. In fact, I just shared a album cover with Nick yesterday regarding the Blue Oyster Cult band, which is kind of famously known as being an occultist band, but they did an album in 74 called Secret Treatises, and the album cover has the lead singer in process garb with 3 German shepherds at his feet.
Oh. No, it doesn't. So not the Blue Oyster Cult. No.
Yep.
That's I was telling Dana, I was like, not Skinny Puppy, no.
Right?
Damn. That's crazy.
Yeah. Wow. And they got some deep occultism in their lyrics and music for sure.
You know, that's
regarding occultism. Just one point I want to make real quick to piggyback on something Nick said a few minutes ago with Epstein. I actually suspect Epstein's an occultist. And the reason I don't have a vast, body of research to really support that, other than when I was reviewing the case years ago, he was looking at the Sunshine Law documents out of Florida, where the public records laws out of Florida. You can see the documents. He was signing in and out of jail every day, not with his own signature, but with like a horizontal infinity loop, which is kind of a magical symbol, especially in the sigil and practice, which I'm sure Nick.
Yeah, it's above the magician on the tarot card.
Yeah, so that was the way Epstein was signing himself in and out of jail every day, when he should have been in jail, but getting to go on work release to his house or to his island or wherever else he was going. He was signing an infinity symbol instead of Jeffrey Epstein, which I find very intriguing.
Now, was his island near St. John?
It's Little St. James is right next to the Disney Island. Speaking of Disney, before that Dana had mentioned, it's right next door to the Disney Island because Disney used to run scuba diving adventures for teenagers off their island by the Little St. James.
Yeah.
Some sick stuff. Of course, one of the people in Epstein's client book was a former U.S. senator from Maine who was later the head of Disney. So I believe the chairman of the board of Disney. So there is some certain connections there for sure.
That's horrible.
Well, there's other connections too on the West Coast because, so somebody recently purchased Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, which was Epstein's ranch. And, the FBI never raided his ranch, which I think is completely insane. But so I had told Nick specifically because he got a good kick out of it. So Leah Ramini blocked me on Twitter because I kept asking her about best friends and why she's telling people to donate to a Scientology cult as a quote unquote ex-Scientologist.
Right.
So she sent a honeypot. Yeah, super suspect. So she sent me a honeypot. I'm assuming it's from her because this person is friends with her. But so I did some digging into that church that this individual quote unquote defected from, and it's called the Church of Spiritual Technology. It is it's above the Church of Scientology. And what they do is they make the rules, and I'm pretty sure they're owned by like the Crown in Canada, which is also super sus.
Really?
But they've been working in Trementina in New Mexico, and they've been digging underground bunkers specifically to store L. Ron Hubbard's documents to preserve them for whatever's coming. But so you have like Scientology doing that, you have Epstein's ranch right here, and then you have whatever the hell is going on with best friends specifically. Like, there's just some very weird stuff going on within that circle of land on the map. You know what I mean?
No,
and then the stuff going on in the Bahamas.
That's a good point. Yeah, the Church of Spiritual Technology is an odd component of the Scientology organization. And regarding the site you were mentioning in New Mexico, what I find quite funny about that site is with all this creativity. L. Ron Hubbard was supposed to be this great sci-fi writer and this creative individual. He used to smoke cool cigarettes. And the interlocking circles of the symbol of the cool cigarettes. If you look at an overview aerial shot of that site, the entire site is designed as a cigarette pack, like the logo from a cigarette pack.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's 2 interlocking circles. It's the same. It's the symbol from his cool cigarette pack. He was a chain smoker. He famously had folks like Leah Ramini following him around, holding his cigarettes for him and lighting his cigarettes because she was part of the Messengers crew within L. Ron Hubbard. Had these teenage kids that were part of the Sea Org that were operating as this Messengers crew, and it's predominantly women. There was a few men on board there as well, but or young boys. But a lot of them, one would carry the ashtray, one would carry a lighter, another one would carry a cigarette. They were just following around lighting the cigarettes and stuff. So I just find it comical that he would design this site where they're going to store all these Scientology records for the future, end of the world, right? Future apocalypse. That he designs it like a cigarette pack. The logo, the side of it.
Now, is it like a Vesica Pisces symbol? The way you're explaining it?
Yeah, something similar to that. Yeah.
That's interesting.
There might be some more occult.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying there just might be some more occult stuff to it, but just on its face, it looks just like his cigarette logo.
Yeah, sure.
Dana, I just found it weird how you brought up Leah again, that she had an Alsatian as well on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know.
I'm just like, come on.
She can play games all she wants, but it's whatever, man. I am of the opinion, very much so, that chick is a straight up Processian. I think most of the famous quote unquote ex-Scientologists are Processians. Lots of animal advocacy. No, I'm not anti-animal. It's just, technically. And it makes sense to me since I've been working with these Scientology whistleblowers where, you never really leave Scientology, right? Because if you're following Hubbard's fair game policy, you're that's it. You're coming back or you're leaving the planet. It's one or the other. And so it makes sense to me that there's people just sort of moving their way out and all grouping together, you know what I mean, without having any actual what I would call real fair game. Because I've read Hubbard's old writings where it's destroy, you're always on the attack, black PR campaigns and the like, and I don't think that somebody giving you a side eye at 7-Eleven is fair game, but I guess we'll see what the judge says when she goes to court. So
that's a good point, because David Miscavige infamously tried to kill his own father for leaving the church. Ron Miscavige. He hired 2 private investigators that were busted with sniper rifles and silencers.
Right. Yeah, but she paints herself as like the greatest enemy of the church, and I'm just like, seems like he was a little more mad at some other people. You know what I mean?
Exactly. No, that's a good point.
You know what I was thinking? I mean, even if you just want to look at this sometimes I think it's just purely like they just want to make money. They literally could have been like, it is more profitable for us to make us look like bad people right now than it is to us actually getting new people into the church.
I'm glad you said that, because I think that was the role of Marty Rathbun, who was the former head of the spiritual technology. Yeah. And now he's back in, right?
So it's like if you're still connected to the people that are talking crap about you and they're making money doing that, I mean, you're just making money regardless.
Oh yeah, Marty Rathbun was one of the top offenders of the church. He would have been their number one. He'd have been their Osama bin Laden, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. And so would have Mr. Mike Rinder. Like the people that were on that show when it first came out on A&E, and then like you said, Rathbun went back in. What I think is happening, because I do think that there's an argument that maybe Rinder and Rathbun pissed off Miscavige. I think that it's a like coup d'etat. You know what I mean? Against Miscavige, because nobody's really seen Miscavige. Nobody's actually seen him in a long time. And when you look at what happened to L. Ron Hubbard, he disappeared years before it was announced that he was dead, and the stories kept changing. The same thing has happened with Heber Jensch. People say that Heber Jensch is still alive, but I don't believe that Heber is still with us. I think that he's gone, but nobody has seen him. Yeah, like nobody's seen him for over a decade, and now we haven't seen Miscavige either. And I think that it's a coup, and I think that they realize that it's more profitable to sort of play the enemy while they're working out the specifics within the hierarchy inside.
For sure.
And if it is people that are involved in best friends, it also makes sense to me, because it's like a land grab almost, you know, as far as all the property that they've been buying and all the stuff that they've been investing in. I think it's like an arms race for property, specifically as far as the financials go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And if I may add 2 points on top of that for you in response to your comments there, Dana, those are some good points. The Mike Render was actually he was one of the closest messengers to L. Ron Hubbard in the final years of his life. He was the one transmitting communications from Hubbard's secret hiding spot to other places around Scientology. And in regard to Heber C. Gents, the president, where Miscavige is the chairman of the board, as he likes to call himself, all of the boards for that matter, because there's so many of them, right? Heber C. Gents was the president, and I agree with you. I don't think he's around any longer either, but he's a descendant of one of the OG Mormon guys, Heber C. Grant. That's where he gets the Heber from.
Yeah, I had done a deep dive because I didn't know about Heber. You know, he's sort of talked about, but I was like, there was a Mormon that was the president in like after Hubbard, you know, because they play that he wasn't the president, but there's newspaper articles that he is the president of the Church of Scientology International. I think it's real weird that Leah Remini filed that lawsuit. They have written Heber out of that entire thing. He does not exist. It went from Hubbard to Miscavige. So I think, in my opinion, there are people that know some things that the public does not.
Absolutely. And Heber C. Gents, to me, is an important character. His father was one of the OG Mormon fundamentalists that when they broke off with the polygamy stuff, their family came to that side of the Mormon church because they got thrown out for polygamy. His father did. And then Heber C. Gents grew up in that environment with the fundamentalist polygamist cults of the Mormon religion. And on top of that, if you look in their ancestry, if I'm not mistaken, again, Heber C. Grant goes back to the Huntington family. The Huntington family were one of the very most important members of the founding members of Mormonism and the Skull and Bones.
Wow.
Oh, I live like 10 minutes away from a Huntington.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yep. Probably. Yeah. I don't know for certain if that's the same roots, the same family, but I have I would not be surprised.
And we have a Smith Town in Long Island too that I've questioned.
Considering Smithtown,
considering like if you go and check a lot of the way that the Mormons that came over from over there, a lot of them left from Liverpool and ended up like landing on Long Island or going through Manhattan. Like they came through like New York. So it's like you wonder like are some of these town names literally because of the Mormons that came through as well? Or Germans.
That's a good point. And there was a surge of Mormonism in the 1850s and 1860s, or actually 1840s, 1860s. That were about 1845, we'll call it. They started recruiting. When they started heading west, they had a recruiting effort shipping people in from England to America, specifically already under membership. So they would baptize them over there, ship them over here, and then continue sending them out west. But you're right, they did come through Liverpool, and they largely landed in New York. So that's a good point you make there, Nick. There's likely a lot of Mormon heritage to some of those towns.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just something that I've even noticed. It was like that's a little coincidental. And before we get too far, I don't want to take this too long. I figured maybe about an hour and a half, and we're about at an hour. There is a topic that I think both of you could probably actually talk on, and I think you mentioned it earlier yourself, Dana. Son of Sam stuff ties.
Wow. That I thought that people were getting real weird with the Manson stuff, the ex-Scientology community, because the High Jolly West, things of that nature, they seem to be great fans of the late Dr. Lewis Doyle and Jolly West. But I knew that eventually I was going to get to Son of Sam, right? I mean, you kind of have to because of the time frame, how everything plays out. And when you read the publications in the newspapers, screw what the process is saying. They're liars. They've been lying since day one. They are disinformation agents, but there are nuggets of truth. But when you see their movement, they were well established within New York before any of that stuff started happening. I've found them in Florida, very heavy in Florida before anyone else. I have them in Florida in like 1972. I also have them in Memphis in 1972. They're in Pittsburgh. They are everywhere immediately. So it's
Cincinnati.
That's
in Cincinnati. Yes.
Florida to me is still a Mormon connection. This is the most private property, I think, is like, or the biggest orange fields are owned by them in Florida.
My take is more of like David McGowan sort of PTK, because like Henry Lee Lucas said that he was being trained by a satanic paramilitary cult before he did what he did with Otis Toole, and they were in the Everglades. Well, the process, literally their headquarters in Florida were off of Biscayne Boulevard in Miami, and they were like putting on plays for kids. I have them putting on The Grinch Who Stole Christmas specifically, so they were involved in a lot of weird stuff. But as far as Son of Sam, because I just finished The Ultimate Evil, I know that some people are very hung up on the minute details, the forensics of each case. I don't care about that. That's irrelevant to me because enough time has passed, and I just don't think that that's a fruitful debate for people to have. It's what was going on at the time. And I personally think that that David Berkowitz was the patsy. I think that he was the fall guy, quite frankly. There's just too many weird things with what they describe in the book about, and I don't remember which crime it was. I know it was very early in the book where apparently Berkowitz was there and there was a yellow car, or like a car with a yellow roof, but they talk about the person, the getaway driver, and they're sticking their arm out and they're holding the door closed. And it was a consistency in the clothes that witnesses said that they saw that matches what the process was wearing at that time. Those sort of like blue-ish gray uniforms, you know what I mean, with the sleeves rolled up. And then the stuff with Arliss Perry, I 110% think that the process did that. I personally think that one of the guys at Best Friends right now was the person that was described in that book, because that was the person that literally came to my mind immediately, because I had never read it before. It gave me goosebumps because that was exactly who I saw like in that outfit. And when you see pictures of that guy at that time, and it may be nothing, it may be me just being noided, but in the book, they say that he wasn't wearing a watch, right? Every other picture of that man from that time frame, he is wearing a watch. So it's just kind of weird to me. I don't know.
That is odd.
That was some good points. That's some solid points. If I can jump in here and offer some insight here in my analysis, I tend to agree with the statements Dana made, and as far as not getting lost in the minutia and looking at it from more of a meta-analysis on the activities and some of the more, verifiable salient characteristics of those circumstances. And I personally think individuals like retired NYPD Detective Mike Codella offer a lot of insight into these activities, because it wasn't just at the time in the NYPD and for that matter Yonkers PD, wasn't just the late 70s there and early 80s that they were investigating these activities. These investigations continued on through numerous iterations and numerous detectives on into the mid-90s. And you have individuals such as retired NYPD Detective Mike Codella, who offers his statements to this day on various podcasts and whatnot, where he describes how he investigated these individuals and relative to other occult murders in Staten Island. And I even came face to face with Robert de Grimston in Staten Island, trying to seek, question him about some of these activities. So I think there is, I like to say Maury Cherry was far more right than he was wrong. And I think time has proven that. Again, he may have been lost on a few details. He may have been intentionally misled on a few details, because if you have someone investigating these things, why would you, if you're an organization like the Process, why would you not want to impact that individual and steer them in the wrong direction? And you're not going to do it once, you're not going to do it twice, you're going to continually try to do that in a fair game type style, the same way Scientology operates. And on top of that, I look at I look at these organizations, and I kind of discussed this with Nick the other day regarding a different ancient alien cargo cult that built around some mounds in Georgia.
I couldn't believe how we were both looking at the same thing, just under one of the multiple names it had.
Exactly.
Like, wow.
Yeah. So that's the New Wabian Nation. Is that their city they built was Tom and Ray, and the way I relate to that is this was an organization that started, I think, around 2000s. They built this compound in Georgia. It was started by this fellow named Dwight York. Dwight York was a member of the Nation of Islam. He had an offshoot of the Nation of Islam. Now, Nation of Islam today is all Scientologists. Louis Farrakhan a few years ago signed the entire nation up. So this kind of precedes that date where Louis Farrakhan did that, but it does seem to indicate there is some crossover between these organizations. Even before the date they officially became Scientologists. They share some similar theology and ancient alien cargo cult type activities within those philosophies. Now, this specific one in Georgia got busted by the feds in 2004. Dwight York got shipped to prison for child sex trafficking. However, that cult, he was the cult leader, but the cult was being financed by Wesley Snipes, Hollywood actor Wesley Snipes. He owned the security company that guarded the compound. He was a member of the cult. And it's my assertion that this is the reason why they came after Wesley Snipes for tax evasion, because at the same time they were throwing away the cult leader for sex trafficking, they're prosecuting Snipes under an Al Capone type prosecution for tax evasion. Now, that cult still exists today.
Didn't he flee to Europe or to London?
Oh, Wesley Snipes, Snipes did not go quietly. Yeah, he did not go quietly on any of that. Now, and it had a very sovereign citizens movement anyway as part of their theology. So they actually thought that they actually believed they were the mound builders. They built the pyramids. These Nubian nation people were descendants of the pyramid builders, descendants of the mound builders, and that they didn't have to follow any of the modern laws. These are the same kind of concepts that Scientology follows, that the process follows, this kind of sovereign citizen kind of notion, right? This is something that promulgates all these organizations. Now, I like to compare that organization to what Maury Terry's thesis was with Son of Sam. So Maury Terry, I don't think he ever, from my understanding and from my readings of his research and book, he asserted that it was elements of the process that later formed the Son of Sam. So an offshoot, and there's so many of these offshoots, right? And I use the Nubian nation as an example. So Dwight York goes to prison. The financier, Wesley Snipes, goes to prison. The compound gets seized by the government and just completely destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. And if you look at pictures on the interwebs, this was a very ornately constructed compound with pyramids. I mean, there was not many expenses that were spared, right? So the whole thing was destroyed. However, all the lay membership, right, not the clergy or the inner circles, all the lay members, they just left. I mean, they lived in the surrounding area, right, already of the compound. And some of the people that were part of on the compound, they just left and live in the surrounding areas still today down there in rural Georgia. Now, that's kind of the same thesis as what went on there with the Son of Sam. So the process disbands. However, some of the lay membership, some of the even some of the inner circle, as Terry asserts, De Grimston was involved, and some of the other, upper echelon of the cult was involved in the Son of Sam stuff. So, I think there's some correlations that can be drawn between how these cults operate and when they disband, how things, the people that are adherents to these cults, they don't just like, oh, I'm going to go find a new cult. They're like, no, I'm still following these philosophies. Right. I still live in this area. I'm still doing these things. Yeah. And in Westchester County in the late 1970s, that produced the Son of Sam cult, according to Maury Terry. And I tend to believe he was more right than wrong. That makes any sense to y'all?
I agree. I think it's a great point.
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned even the whole area upstate and stuff with Son of Sam, with New York, and I think maybe where that other cult, the children or some shit like that, or something else that I think he might have been involved with. I think that was kind of like a hotbed for occultism at one point. And what I think does happen, regardless, somebody could maybe have left the OTO, but had still maybe thought they had a different understanding of it and start their own kind of offspring, and sometimes their own thing. And sometimes I wonder, does that happen, or does somebody who's in one of those legit secret societies kind of start their little offshoot of a cult that has an agenda as well? Because
Timothy Wiley kind of did that, right, in the late 1970s, did he not? He left the Foundation of Faith, started his own.
That's the way that it's painted. That's the way that they paint it. Yeah, and that's what makes the process so confusing, because they literally say oh, we went over and did this and we did this, and at the end of the day, they were all still operating under, whether you want to call it the umbrella of the process, the foundation, the foundation faith of God, the foundation faith of the millennium. They were all still together doing the exact same thing. Now, they all move around a little bit differently, but, Ed Sanders had the same thesis as well, as far as the ultimate evil, that it was, a couple of different cults and that these crimes were inspired. But in my opinion, now that I have started tracing where the process is moving and what they're saying, I think that the spinoffs or the other cults that might be involved in some of these crimes are just the process cloaking themselves under something else. I think that their theology of the 4 deities made it really convenient for them to do that, especially in the sort of Jesus freak, Jesus people movement, as well as like the New Age movement, because that was where Timothy Wiley really thrived. That was where he went in really deep specifically. I think that it's the process all the way down. I think that they are the ones that infiltrated the most, specifically all over the country, because, they had British intelligence money, straight up. Sure. They had a lot of money. They did not have a budget that they had to answer to. And even in the court case against Ed Sanders, the judge said, you guys have literally not shown us that you've lost a dime. In fact, we haven't seen any of your income, but everywhere that you guys move since your birth, you guys have lived in some of the most expensive places in those areas. Yep. They also spare no expense. As far as the NOI and that stuff in Georgia, I would just like to point out that Leah Remini was the one who recruited Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam.
Smokes.
So
I did
what
not
a
know
girl
that.
boss. Yes, she did.
Holy
what a girl boss.
That's interesting. I did not know that point. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Ed Sanders, I know Maury Terry relied on some of his research to come to his conclusions, but I think Ed Sanders and him both found independent confirmations of these same aspects that you just discussed, especially the British intelligence portions, and this seamlessly endless pot of money. Now, one thing relative to that aspect I find interesting is the Tavistock Institute. At the same time the process is being created in the UK, the Tavistock Institute is conducting research, writing papers regarding controlling society through the creation of chaos.
Yes.
Which suddenly this chaos cult erupts.
Yes.
At the same time.
Exactly it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. Bainbridge was the one that said when they implemented group therapy into compulsions analysis, that was when the cult exploded.
Yes.
And he called it religious engineering. Everybody, Tavistock, they say, is social engineering. So, yeah, there's definitely Tavistock's hand in all of this.
You know what? That just made me start thinking of, I guess the whole chaos, like a chaos therapy type idea. I'm trying to think of these old like drug rehabilitation places that had like really weird techniques that go back and like links to weird shit. I think like
Narconon? That's a wholly owned Scientology
or like Elon something or whatever. Like Apple is kind of like an old example, but there's something before that was like, it was like you just got in rooms and screamed at each other like fucking animals and shit. It was fucking insane. It was really
that's
weird.
Part of the Scientology. That's one of their early on techniques that they do is the bull baiting, right?
Mm-hmm. The Seed is one of the youth like drug programs that was really big here in Florida, but they got in a lot of trouble. But it was called the Seed program. There was a lot of them.
Yeah. So with Narconon, what most people don't understand with Narconon, sorry, my dog, my best friend, my dog here keeps bumping on my computer. Narconon was started by a guy who wrote L. Ron Hubbard for prisons, like, hey, you're Scientology, because Scientology is so rampant within the prison system. I mean, that's where Charles Manson discovered it, apparently. So this guy writes to L. Ron Hubbard and was like, hey, I've been using your techniques, and you can't use L. Ron's techniques without his approval and without it being sanctioned. So he immediately was like, yeah, cool, you can keep using my techniques for this drug rehabilitation, but we're going to do it together. And today, and throughout many states in America, throughout many counties in those states, the official taxpayer-funded kind of drug rehabilitation that people get ordered to go to is Narconon, and what people don't realize is they're walking into a Scientology indoctrination, including doing things like the rundown, sitting in the saunas, taking all the vitamins. These are all things that are experienced through this Narconon program, and is essentially a wholly owned subsidiary of Scientology.
They have Criminon as well, which is how I think that they got the tech into Manson specifically, because he did get auditing in prison. I think that they brought it in under Criminon, though.
That makes sense. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And there's other creepy kind of drug rehabilitation things that have ties to Scientology, like Synanon.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of, man. I was still trying to figure out a way to Google it. Synanon. Yeah. Yeah. There was like, and then there was, I think, like other kind of like, I forgot, therapeutic communities, I think they would call them. You know, and like those tactics were used there. I mean, there was one. You know, it was weird. Like, I even lived near one when I grew up. I lived in Lake Ronkonkoma, and there was one right on the lake. And, like, I remember, like, you know, hearing stories or, like, even meeting people that, like, you know, just through town that happened to leave there. And they'd be telling you crazy stories about why they left. And it's like, oh, yeah, they'll tell you, like, if you screwed up and did something dumb, you have to go out and, like, go out tomorrow morning. You got to sweep the front stoop until the sun goes down.
Oh, that's very
like shit like that, or like digging holes, moving the shit, and then making you just bring it back. Yeah, it would be like, it's very weird shit like that, and very confrontational. You had people yell at you. It was just really weird. And I was like, what the fuck?
Well, that's what Scientology does to their Sea Org members that ask questions or misbehave. They get sent to that kind of duty.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, just some
Process did the same thing too.
Yeah.
Process was doing the exact same thing. Marianne was doing the exact same thing. The British Medical Association, the reason why technically they started their journey to the Bahamas and Mexico was because the British Medical Association was threatening to shut them down because they were making people sign waivers that if anything happened with your mental health, they were not liable, but they were being accused of practicing psychiatry without any formal training or licensing. And then, you know, a couple former Process members ended up taking their life later on. So
and that's one thing with all this veneration of Nazism and stuff within these Scientology and Process organizations. It's one thing I've long not been really able to put my finger exactly on what's going on there, because you look at Process and they're very pro-Nazi. But the Scientologists seem very anti-Nazi, because the Nazis are the ones that really formulated this whole field of psychiatry, and one of the biggest opponents of Scientology seems to be psychiatrists. You know, that's one of their top, stated opponents. They have a museum of death in Los Angeles that is dedicated to the travesty of, as they put it, of psychiatry. Whereas, the Process folks don't seem to have any problem with the Nazis.
No.
It just seems like an odd dynamic between very similar, offshoot organizations, and it seems to be there may be some part of the feud there, that may exist, and I think a lot of these organizations, they do feud, and then something I've mentioned with, again, back to the Society of Cincinnati, I think there's been an ongoing feud within that secret society for many years in this country since it began, and that they're happy to feud internally while still acting as one kind of actual organization externally, right? Like, they don't want to let anyone outside the organization in on the feud. They don't want to let them know about the feud. And if someone tries to impose the organization from an external, position, they're happy to combine forces and attack that external force. Right. That seems to be my take of how I see these occult and secret societies operate, and specifically within the Process and Scientology sphere of these activities.
I think veneration is a perfect word for how they view the Nazis. And wasn't one of the founding members of Best Friends, their daughter went into the Navy and did a stint in Antarctica? And I was like, how weird is that? I'm like, come on.
She got contracted to do that. Does Bainbridge work for isn't it the National Science Foundation?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. That's where she got that under. She was awarded that through the National Science Foundation. I found that newspaper article. Yeah, not at all.
None.
No.
Zero.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. I just found the actual clipping of that, and
his obsession with space. That's the other thing. Bainbridge and then you go back to the whole Mormonism of space and psychology and manipulation and cults, and I mean, he's perfect for them on that whole angle. So yeah, for
sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, Mormons love space. Their God lives. Their God lives on a planet near the star Sirius, if you ask them. Yeah. Of course, much like Scientology, you don't get that story from day one. Scientology, you get the Xenu tale, 100 grand in, and 6 years later, Mormonism is not so much the same, volume of money you're spending, but you're certainly spending money and spending time in which before you attain that level
Right.
of understanding. Yeah. Very similar in both those capacities.
I'd wondered, I mean, it sounds silly, but I even wondered, like, again, going back to the Son of Sam and this whole dog involved, talking to him. Could that even been like I guess, like, maybe a way of, like, showing, like, maybe the process or the best friends, like, that's part of the script to show, like, we were involved in this.
Oh.
You know,
Interesting.
so it's like a signature, like, their signature is tossed in there.
It's my opinion. Not
Calling
silly
card,
at all.
if you will.
Yeah, calling card. Very, very well said, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Kind of like the use of a smiley face, if you will.
Exactly, yes.
Or a stylized smiley face as the best friend's logo.
Yes.
And the term
Calling
of
card.
friends, which is,
Yes.
familiars, which is
Right.
dogs, So, yeah, I agree.
No, that's for sure. That is an interesting point. I would call that a calling card, yeah.
But then why skin them? Why skin the dogs? Why sacrifice
I don't
them?
know. So when I was digging through to find like what was going on, all over the country the best that I could, I mean, there were animal sacrifices, like ritual sacrifices going on everywhere.
Right.
Obviously, it wasn't just dogs. They had stuff with cows and sheep and things like that. But that was a consistency, was the ears being hacked off, sometimes the reproductive organs that they could get. But a lot of them were skinned, and I don't know what purpose that serves. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good question, Lisa.
Found it very odd. I mean, of all things, whether it's mutilation, sacrificial, any kind of whatever, it means something. The skinning means something. It's almost like Native American when you scalp somebody as you demoralize them and stuff like that. But it almost felt like if it is a calling card to the process, it almost felt like a diss track. You know what I mean? They're like, like a middle finger to the process church or to the Nazis, because you venerate, like, to steal your word, do you venerate these Alsatians? We're going to skin them because it's a dog. A dog is a dog is a dog, right? But without the skin, without the hide, you don't know what kind of breed it is.
Sure.
You take off the ears, you take off the genitalia, you're now just a dog. You no longer have a hierarchy within the breeds, so to speak.
That's a great point. And I agree. There is purpose to that. There is definitely purpose to it. They're not doing it just because. In regard to some occult aspects, I believe Nick may be able to answer my question here, but there's some, is it Hecate? Is that the dog sacrifice goddess?
Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. The three-faced goddess, Hecate, yeah.
In the Society of Cincinnati, it took Hecate, it took Diana, and I believe one other goddess, and kind of combine them into their goddess that they venerate, and that's the goddess Columbia, which is why we have the District of Columbia and Columbia Records, Columbia Broadcasting Company. I mean, you name it, Columbia University.
I think Bainbridge went to Columbia, didn't he?
And Mary Ann de Grimston was called Hecate.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's on the legal record. That's in the court records that she was internally, because there was the outer and then the inner, and there was some sort of dispute as far as the alpha and the omega. So the alpha was the people, the inner processians, and then the omega was Marianne and Robert, and that's how they would communicate, the alpha receiving a message from the omega. But yes, specifically Marianne de Grimston was known as Hecate to the internal members.
Wow, I did not know that.
I had even wondered if it somehow goes back to this is just for me because how I look at occultism and stuff, skinwalker idea. I think that's deeply occulted, and I'm wondering if, like, removing the skin, I think, like, the idea of the skinwalker is kind of like the magician coming back into the flesh, in a sense. Dog, removal of the flesh, now you're God, which is backwards for dog. But I am wondering if, like, somehow, like I was even saying, and it's an idea that I have in the Gnostic Mass. I was even saying that in some point, I think, even when it comes down to electromagnetic shit, electricity and magnetism, I was like, I even think that the priestess comes out first, and then the male energy, the electric, kind of the chaos or whatever kind of comes out towards that magnet, and now it starts dressing like you see in the Gnostic Mass. The guy comes out, she starts to dress him. You know, the magnetic pull is now putting that energy into form, and then when he leaves, you know, whatever. It's so like, to me, a skinwalker is just like kind of like almost Frankenstein in a sense. You know what I'm saying? You know, Nimrod was a skinwalker. You know, there is a lot of weird occult stuff, in my opinion, when it starts coming to the whole skinwalker idea. And then if you even want to entertain any of this, now you have to start wondering about the Mormons over at Skinwalker Ranch.
Well, now that you bring up I don't know why, but this is just clicked. Skinwalker, the religion prior to Inshul, before pre-Columbian, before, they believed in spirit animals, a Tona and a Nahual, and one of them was a protective, and the other one you could morph or basically take the skin of an animal, walk into the woods and become one with nature and communicate to that realm, but you would essentially become a skinwalker into nature. So, and it's all in that area, the Yucatan, where Stuhl is.
No, that is
Mormons were, yeah.
No, and the Mormons are big in Mexico. They have been. They have been for many years.
They really are. So.
And a lot of these other offshoots of Scientology, like Nexium, would be considered an offshoot or squirrels of Scientology. And you know, in recent years, the Mormon fundamentalists were shipping babysitters to Albany to babysit Nexium kids, and then you know, that all got brought up in court, and those were part of the LeBaron Romney components of the Mormon fundamentalist cults in Mexico. And they were actually murdered by Mexican drug cartels, some of those individuals in recent years. So there is a lot of these weird kind of crossovers between these organizations and operations in Mexico, because Keith Raniere, the head of Nexium's, when he got arraigned for his child sex trafficking charges, his attorney argued, you can't charge my client because Scientology's been running these child farms in Mexico for years. Right. So there is this weird dynamic with these organizations, even the Mormons shipping babysitters to help out with these Nexium Scientologists, even in Mexico. And Mexico seems like a great place to operate with those kind of operations, because there's, you know, less oversight, and there's, you know, lack of laws, and then very much so you operate in this kind of sovereign citizen mindset down there. Because if you look at the example, the Mormon compounds, they're heavily fortified. They have, you know, small arms guarding them, etc. So it's not like they're just living, you know, down in Mexico having a good time or something like that. They're at war. They're always securing their compounds and facilities and people.
And that's been my theory, that it's been kept unstable for that purpose.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, that
makes sense.
So
or they get operating in an order of chaos, so to speak,
on purpose.
Yep. No, that makes sense to me for sure.
Weird shit. Really weird. Was there anything else with the Son of Sam though, before we wrap it up, that any of you maybe want to touch on and throw out there?
I just think that, I mean, I think people want to discount it right now. I think there's a process church kind of cover-upper movement that's also involved in kind of discrediting the Maury Terry elements or the Ed Sanders elements of telling those same stories of the process and their connections to past incidents and events such as Son of Sam. Because, for example, I'll just leave you with one example. The head of the Satanic Temple out of Salem, Massachusetts, where you were just at there recently, Nick, a fellow by the name of Lucien Graves, not his real name, legal name, but that is the pseudonym which he operates under. He operates a website called The Process, www.process.org. And it is essentially a blog dedicated to discrediting satanic ritual abuse, events and activities. So.
Yep.
Oh, one thing I did want to add too. I know we're talking about Mexico before we wrap it up. And that was kind of like off the Son of Sam, because I was going to tie in. I mean, Charles Manson, he was headed to Mexico. Mormons, believe it or not, you may know this actually, JJ. I came across that there's like tours that you can take, that there's certain Mormons that actually go to the pyramid in Mexico and actually go and I think walk it, because they have some belief that with Jesus or something with that, some weird thing with that pyramid. And the Order of Quetzalcoatl, which is an inner order of the Freemasons, they go once a year and they walk the same thing.
For sure. Do you know who used to run a organization, own a business, who used to have Mormons pay him to take them down there before he owned Skinwalker Ranch. Brandon Fugel, that's what he was engaged in. He owned this Mormon exploration kind of company where he would take the Mormon people, a Mormon tourism vacation type of deal down to the Central American temples and whatnot. And so there is something to what you're saying there for sure.
That's wild. And, I know, I did point at Brandon Fugel as being a little sus in the whole Skinwalker series that we put out. But, like, even since then, there's been times where it's like he's, like, gotten ballsy with it to where, like, when he does an interview, he's got his Masonic books on the back shelf now. Like, fucking.
Yeah, he's an interesting character. In fact, my dude, Detective Portal, that joins me on some of my recent Process Church podcast episodes. He trolls Brandon Fugel on Twitter, and for whatever reason, Brandon Fugel retweets his trolling. I don't understand it.
I've said a few things to him under the old Occult rejects, and he would respond. I was actually surprised. Yeah.
Every time it happens, I'm like, why is this dude retweeting your obvious trolls?
Yeah, one time I think I screwed up and I was trying to hit him with all the Mormon and Mason connections, and I think I left out whatever, and I put morons and Masons. And I was like, fuck, and like with Twitter, you can't edit it, after the fact. And I think he actually retweeted it, like kind of like,
nice.
He's like, yeah, this dude just fucked up with something. But I was like, damn it.
I think part of it is within Mormonism, from my assessment and from looking at people like him, and the way he operates as an adult. I mean, there is a childlike mindset that they keep you in, even into adulthood within these organizations, and I think that's evident within some of look at the hobbies of Brandon Fugel. If you look at what he's into, he collects all these like comic book and movie memorabilia stuff, and he very much acts like an excited 12-year-old when he's discussing it.
He's buying a fuck ton of property in Hawaii.
Is he? Well, the Mormons love Hawaii. They went over there early and incorporated some of the Hawaiian royal family into the religion.
And if I do remember correctly, I think I've said this a few times. I think it was when the Shriners were on their way back from Hawaii, from doing something or whatever. I guess like vacation together, and they were like on a boat ride back to the United States. They came up with the idea for the Order of Quetzalcoatl.
Oh, interesting.
Which is the order that I said goes to the same pyramid that some of the I guess some of the more weirder believing Mormons go to. That have
for sure
beliefs. So definitely, I wanted to mention that I just find it weird. Charles Manson had a thing with that, and then just Freemasonry and the Mormons is again like another weird connection from Mexico with all of them again, in my opinion.
No, and that makes sense to Lisa's point about intentionally keeping it chaotic in the nation of Mexico too, so that these organizations can thrive. Because NXIVM was thriving. I mean, NXIVM was big here, but I think it might have been bigger in Mexico with the children of former Mexican presidents, being high-ranking members within the cult.
Right. Yeah.
And I would like to remind, for those who don't know, the Vatican was assisting and helping protect the Process Church of the Final Judgment for a period of about 4 years, specifically. So that's the big hand over everything, right? Is the Vatican. Everything is tied in together. All of these cults and religions, churches, all of them. But Process has not gone away, and they are protected by the Catholic Vatican.
It's the richest nation on the planet. So I mean,
and who has the strongest hold over Latin America?
Exactly. There you go. Yeah, good point. Yeah, in fact, that's where they shipped the Nazis into America through the under Vatican passports through El Paso.
Yeah.
What's Juarez?
No. Yes, through Juarez.
Yeah, Juarez. Yeah, the embassy in Juarez. Yeah.
To Argentina and Chile. Yeah.
Wow. Yep. And into El Paso from Juarez as well.
Yes, very much so. And isn't the Pope from Chile, Argentina, one of those?
I believe you're right. Yeah, I think he's Argentina.
Yeah, he's Bergoglio or some Bergoglio.
I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah.
They're originally Italians, but they lived over there, grew up there, and he was part of the whole dirty wars of Argentina with the desaparecidos, where all those people went missing because they were testifying against people and dropping them out of planes.
Really?
So, holy crap!
And he totally just basically was like, no, nothing happened.
Classic tale.
They just fell out.
Classic tale of a criminal. I wasn't there. I didn't do it.
No.
I was on the ground. I don't know how they fell out of the sky.
Yeah. That's a sad story. It's a sad. But to see those, the mothers would cry in the plaza asking for their children back. And so when they would receive bodies, it was like a blessing because at least they had something to mourn. Yeah.
That's
Holy
terrible.
smokes, I did not know that.
Yeah. You'll have to look that up. That's interesting.
Yeah, they're a creepy organization, that Vatican.
Yeah.
And that process, for that matter.
Yeah, that's a really interesting
absolutely.
connection. Very interesting. Well, thank you all for jumping on. I appreciate all your input. That was an amazing episode. It was 10 times better than I could even have thought. So I really appreciate it. Lisa, I know, like you really don't get a show, but thank you for coming on. I mean, you're an Occult reject anyway. Dana, thank you very much again for doing what you do and the deep dives you go into. Let everybody know where they can find your stuff if they don't know already.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Rotting Jewels on Instagram and YouTube, and Dana Duda on Twitter. And Lisa, you should consider getting your own show because your beautiful brain, you're super smart. But yeah, thank you guys for having me. Smart.
No, thank you. And JJ, you already know, man. I was telling you, earlier, a few days ago, no homo. I was like, I love having you on, dude. I love having a conversation with you.
Yeah, sure. Right back at you, Nick. No, I appreciate the invite. Great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Lisa, great points. Yeah, I'll second Dana's statements.
Oh, y'all are
podcast. I learn stuff every time we have conversations, be it this or smiley face killer type activities. Dana, great to meet your acquaintance. I enjoyed the conversation and learned
Me too.
excellent points from you as well here today, and that I was unaware of, especially relative to a lot of this process history, which is definitely intriguing to me. And look forward to future conversations. If you ever want to get back together again here and link up again for another process conversation, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I think
folks on the interwebs can tune into Operation GCD and locate discussions on the Process Church, the secret societies, parapolitical activities, and just things that I seem to be censored in our current modern era of censorship that I like to discuss on there. So, found anywhere podcasts are found. I'm sure Nick will include my link tree in the notes.
Yes, I think I have a few links for you in the notes, and I already got Dana's link tree in there now. So, if anybody's catching this live, go check out their stuff. If you haven't already, hit that sub button. You already know what's up just from this episode. That is the end of another Occult Rejects. Until the next one, everybody be well. Later.